So this is going to be admittedly a opinion piece. And that's what the top 5 entry-level locomotives were in my lifetime for people to start that journey down the model railroad path, right? And going to eliminate those things that didn't pull trains pretty much immediately, even though they were really cool and we all had them. And the specialty stuff, that probably wasn't going to be a first choice for a kid. And so usually it boiled down to a locomotive that looked something close to being real, at least in a kid's mind, and could pull a train. So that's what we're going to start from. And this includes, in my mind, things like the Scouts, some of the early switchers, which actually were pretty pricey. And but it's going to exclude things like, well, obviously the more expensive locomotives from the different brands, the Lionel F3s and stuff like that. That doesn't really count. It's got to be one of those things where it was a packaged train set in a box, and then the locomotive that came with it was the basis of a growing hobby for a person to start adding cars and stuff like that. And what makes them better, in my mind, is they're fun to run. They're trouble-free. They don't come off the track. And they're interesting enough to where it spurs future interest in the same basic hobby and pastime. So that's the criteria for me. So we'll go through and run a couple, and then I'm going to tell you what I think the top 2 for sure, and then maybe top 5. We'll get there, because there's a whole bunch of them after the top 2 in my mind that kind of fit the bill. Well, one of these New Havens was literally my first locomotive. So I guess that's a clue, right? And it was followed up by a couple of donations from the neighbors' Marks. But that thing right there has been one of my favorites since the very beginning. Now, I'm going to preview up front that these were really cool, but kind of things that would kick it off the list is it didn't really have much spring tension on that front pilot, and they'd pop off the track from time to time. And it's stuff like that that kicks it off the top 5 list for me. But that's the kind of metric I want to work with. find the contrast pretty interesting. This is a Marx, and that was a kind of a low-cost, entry-level train set that was offered for a long time. And the company basically made its business model about having electric trains and other toys. There's quite a storied history there. Shooting for the lower, price points. And of course, Lionel does that now with these. Well, I guess they did that in the 90s. And both of these things run pretty good. I think it's genius on how the Marx was able to come up with that locomotive with the basic simple drive system they have that now, over 60 years later, still runs quite well. When you look at these here and you try to do analysis, critique, etc., reviews, the metrics used on these have got to be different than model railroading type locomotives. The authenticity, prototypical, how close they are to real, stuff like that doesn't matter. From the get-go, they're supposed to be entertaining in toys. So I would say longevity, how rugged they are, can they handle the abuse of, kids? How many smiles per hour versus miles per hour? How versatile, how well they can run without being maintained. Those are the kind of things you got to think about. And my personal favorites are some of the old Marx, just because they're rugged, simple. And of course the sheet metal frame Alcos, which, they may be a little more sophisticated than the Marx. But man, did they pass the test of time. Now, K-Line had these can motor designs. So did Lionel. Like this one right here. See, in the chainsaw world, we make analogies from like the Homelite XLs as the entry-level saw. And those darn things just never die. And on the marketplace today, there isn't a whole lot that really takes up that space, because the junk saws like the pull-ins and stuff like that, they don't last. Well, I would say this is the Lionel successor. And they came out in the late 80s, 90s era, that basic can motor chassis. And I think they're going to do quite well over time. I think that's a very rugged, simple design. It may not be realistic, although it's a lot more so than some of the other entry-level Lionels. At least they've got a 4-4-2 layout like a true Atlantic, right? But that's not the point. That really isn't the point. The point is, can you get a set powered by one of these locomotives here, set it down, and have, say, a inexperienced parent plus a kid put it together and have it run around in circles and make smiles? And how long does that keep the interest, and how long will they run without giving troubles? And that's the definition of win. I think Lionel's done a great job with these. I also think that K-Line did a great job with these. I really like that little thing. But of course, Lionel has a lot of history to draw from. Marx eventually went away. It may have come back in a different form. Of course, K-Line got absorbed by the Lionels of the world. But I think I'm just going to run these guys for a little bit. Train run. Yeah, if I was to review these two, this was the Marx 666. And of course, this was the early 1990s era K-lines. They run good, and they've run for a long time. This guy doesn't run out of power, he runs out of traction. But it doesn't get warm either. You can just run that thing for hours. That's a very, very cool old Marx locomotive right there. I like that thing. And I put on some cars. It looks like it was dragging that fish car there. Somehow it got kicked off the track. But it drug it around anyway, right? Let's see if we can get it around the track so I can reach it and put the rear tires back on. And then we'll put something else on the front of these two trains. In the aquarium car, it runs pretty good. I don't know who kicked who off the track. I don't know if the caboose kicked the aquarium car off or the other way around. I'm going to guess the other way around because look at that. Isn't that cool? That worm gear on the axle drives that big gear that goes all the way up through. And that's like a piece of mylar or a big rubber band that goes around. It works pretty good. For the toy trains, these sheet metal frame Alcos are my absolute favorite. The ones were built from the late 50s till 1969 when Lionel went under. You know, I like these with the Magnetraction axles, the metal gears. That's why I like them better than the MPCs. These things will run forever, you know. And there's a lot of parts and stuff for them. And when they went to the plastic gears, those guys right there, and that's when I quit having any interest in them because they do wear. But this is a decent sample right here, so let's run this one. I think this series of locomotives is, in my humble opinion, one of the best engineered and executed entry-level toy train concepts of all time right here. Humble opinion, even more than the Scouts, and I know people will disagree. And I'd say for the next level down, these Marx locomotives are right there with them. Now I guess you have to put the Lionel trains of this here. This would be 50s and 1960s. the 264s, there was a whole bunch of them. And I'm not sure they were truly entry level, but from a price point, they're at the same price point as these. So I guess we have to include them. Now they're a little more sophisticated than the Marks, but these darn things just run forever and ever and ever, and I happen to like them. And that would be the 2018s. And that chassis spawned a whole bunch of different models that had more bells and whistles. And so Lionel would add features and add price point to these things. You've seen on this channel the 2024s and 2026s and stuff like that. Well, they did the same with these. They had some entry level, very simplistic Alco FAs, and then added magnet traction on one axle, then two axles, then lights, then whistles and all that to get more features there for a higher price point. But so what's the best? What's the best entry level? I'm going to say that's number 1 on my list. That series of locomotives from Lionel. That would be the best entry level locomotive in train sets of all time right there. The ones that were built around that series. I'm going to say that's number 2. And the reason I'm going to say that's number 1 and number 2 is that both of those series spawned a lot of different models going upscale. But my metric is combination of trouble-free running, for an entry-level toy train or model railroad type. I mean, they run and run and run. They don't come off the track. They don't have problems. And these are just virtually bulletproof. That and a screwdriver is about all you need to maintain those for years and years and years. Same with those. I think the biggest issue I've ever seen with those is the wires, the insulation rotting. That's about it, But they don't pop off the track. They pull trains, So that's number 1. That's number 2. And then from my perspective, that's number 3 and number 4. Now, the reason why I don't believe these are going to go to the top of my opinion list is because they've got plastic running gear. and I don't think they're ever going to last as long as those 1950s into the 1960s era Lionels. And I'm going to say honorable mention are those Marx 666s. So there's my top 5, and it's a humble opinion about what the best entry-level locomotives, at least in my lifetime, were.